Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we are joined by the fantastic Paapa Essiedu to talk all about I May Destroy You. And I wanted to talk a lot about your preparation process in terms of how you shaped Kwame for the series, because it sounds like from the way that you describe your process that you take elements of research to kind of build a little bit of scaffolding and to have that essence of a foundation. And then actually it's a lot about really taking what's on the page and breathing life into that. So I was really interested for a character like this, what that looked like in terms of what the research elements were, and then when you stepped over to really just focusing on the details in the scripts.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose number one, we're kind of blessed by the fact that we've got 12 episodes with which to explore someone. That's like so much time. We're so used to like trying to like in a film, trying to cram it all into like, 2 hours, whatever. 12 episodes is so much time and so much expanse. And with Kwame particularly, um, we kind of see him in many we see him on many different stages of his journey. So that's why research can only take you so far, because it's helpful in terms of providing a foundation and reference points and ideas to jump off from. But life is so chaotic and random, and especially in this series, so many things happen to Kwame, and he goes through so much that's kind of like unexpected, and definitely for him unprecedented. That from there on in, you've got to kind of use imagination and use instinct and use the other people, use the script, use the performers, use the director, whatever, to create something that feels organic and truthful to what he's going through in the moment.
And there's so much power within not only the moments with him as a character, but through your performance in terms of a lot of the very internal moments between the dialogue with him that you bring forth in your performance. And the initial scripted version, from what Michaela's described, was a little bit more dialogue heavy as a character, and then the two of you collaborating is kind of where he landed, where we meet him in the show. And so, what was it specifically about the conversations the two of you were having that really led to him being a little bit more of an internalized character, particularly in terms of dealing with his trauma?
Yeah, I mean, like the amount of times that we would be on set, and I'd be like to Michaela, like, "Can we just like cut this line and cut that line?" And she'd be like, "Do you even want to be in this show?" Um, I just think that so much can be told through um, so much can be told non-verbally, and um, in terms of processing of trauma, I think we all wish we were more verbose or articulate in the way we um, contact it, but like often we're not. And often we suppress it, and often we hide it, and often we, put it to the back of our minds. That feels very human to me. And I feel like Kwame is just another human being. So I felt like there were some moments where what he was going through was so huge, but like he felt so disempowered to be able to um, work through it communally or collectively, or he didn't feel that he had the right to do it really. So I think it led to him kind of suppressing, silencing, censoring, and going through it internally. But I think both ways are ways, and there's no judgment in that. There's not a way. It's not me saying this is the right way or the wrong way, but it seemed like a human way for him to move through what he had gone through.
Yeah, and one of the very first things that he does afterwards is to call Arabella, and then it is kind of just, she's out on the street and just chatting very casually and has no sense of what's going on. And did you think that he was calling her to tell her what happened, or did you think that he was calling her just to kind of hear her voice and have some level of comfort, or was there a different space that you wanted to find within that scene?
It's really very much like in those situations you don't know what you're going to do until you do it. So like it had happened 30 seconds before that phone call. We'd run out of the building, first thing he'd done, kind of like on autopilot. It's not conscious. It's to call someone that he felt safe with, that he trusted, who represented something strong to him. And there was something in the way that Arabella answers the phone, and the way she's like, "Yo, what's up?" And when when he almost kind of opens a door for her to ask about him by saying like, what are you up to or whatever, it did what he needed it to. Well, I mean, it's twofold. Number one, the thing of like having to explain what has happened to you so soon after it's happened, it's not as easy as it sounds, you know, like to give words to it makes it very real very quickly. I don't think he could do that. But also, there was something about hearing her that kind of like rooted him in a space outside of that room where what had happened to him happened. So yeah, it's something that I don't think has much conscious thought attached to it. But again, yeah, it feels truthful.
Yeah, and when he goes to the police station and does report it, it's obviously a hugely different experience than Arabella has when she goes. You know, even down to the fact that when she goes, she's with Terry, she's with Kwame, and she has that support system there with her, even before we look at the rapport that she has with the police officers that she's talking to. And given that, and given the isolation that Kwame experiences in every element, in every way, when he goes in to report it, did Michaela have any conversations with you about really wanting to create that type of juxtaposition and to show how isolated he is in trying to process all of this by himself?
Yeah, I mean, and the historically they're very different processes. You know, the reporting of violence, sexual violence to men, to black men, to black gay men is very historically has been processed in a very different way to women. You know, so like she really wanted to honor the fact that this is something that we've got so far to go on in order to kind of like level the playing field. And like Kwame only goes into the police station because because he is there for Arabella's report. You know, he sees what how she's bolstered. She sees how she's believed and supported. So he's like, oh, maybe, you know what, maybe I'm the same, and maybe I deserve the same as what's happened to her. But like the reality and the fantasy often are very different. So yeah, I'm certain that Michaela wanted to underline that.
Yeah, and I know that the actor who was playing the police officer in that scene with you is someone that you've been friends with for a while as well. So did that create a different level of comfort with having him as your scene partner in finding a lot of the spaces that you go to? Because it's a really emotionally harrowing scene, and at the same time, there's just certain beats that are almost really darkly humorous, like when he's been left in the room by himself and someone walks through, or even just the way, you know, the timing of the beats and the rhythm where he's constantly being cut off by the other guy. And so how did that prior history that the two of you had really help in terms of filming a scene like that with all of those different nuances?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously Kadif is just like one of the most outstanding comic actors in this country. You know, he's like he's got a CV as long as your arm in British comedy. He's done everything. And he's just naturally very funny. And the scene, like you say, written on the page in different circumstances wouldn't be at a place in a different kind of show, in a more comic show, you know. But like it's only the context that makes it so harrowing and so savage, I think. That is what life is as well, you know. Like Michaela would often talk about like the absurdity of like in horrendous things happening, and in those moments really funny things happening, or like the way of processing it, something really humorous happens. So like Kadif, yeah, I felt very safe with him, and it was about like getting the tone of the scene right, you know, because it wasn't about it being self flagellating, or it wasn't about playing the pathos or the pain of what was happening. It was about honoring like the absurdity. You know, truth is madder than fiction often, you know. So it was about honoring that.
Yeah. And then it reaches a point where he's actually the one to kind of end the situation and walk away, even when the police officer's still talking to him. And so I was interested in that beat of the scene and whether you felt like that was Kwame, you know, trying to regain a little bit of the control of the situation, just seeing where things are going and seeing that nothing's going to be taken seriously, or if to a degree it was really just an element of self-defeat in recognizing that absolutely nothing was going to happen.
I don't know if it was a moment of self-defeat, but it was definitely about like, you know, number one, being in a police station as a black man is hard enough as it is, you know, let alone kind of being trivialized and invalidated in that process. He'd been sat in there for a number of hours as well, and the penny had very much dropped about the direction in which the investigation was going. He felt very, very, very claustrophobic, uncomfortable, and unsafe in that space. And I think there was power to him saying, you know what, I'm going to leave now. This is not what I expected it to be. I don't know why I expected it to be different, but it isn't. So I'm going to take control of myself in that situation. So I don't think it was about admitting defeat or anything like that, but it was it was the first moment that he was able to kind of like be vulnerable and like admit or like share what had happened to him, and that was the way that was the way it had been responded to. It was too much for him, so he had to get himself out of the situation.
And when you were filming the scene where he is assaulted, obviously Michaela had a lot of resources in place, from having Ito O'Brien, who's the intimacy coordinator on the series, but then also having a therapist on site for a lot of filming. And was that something that was actually really helpful with other scenes, to have those types of resources, even beyond the assault scene, just because emotionally you're still having to carry yourself to really harrowing places for your performance?
Yeah, of course, because like actinism therapy, you know, we're not meant to be like working out our own demons through, you know, this is our job, you know. And also, to be able to do it properly, you have to be able to do it safely, you know. As soon as it kind of gets reckless and unsafe and like no one really knows what's real and what's not, like obviously, look, there are some people who work very well in those, or not maybe work very well, but produce like very compelling work by working like that. But like, I don't think it's sustainable, and especially in a show where we're talking about consent and boundaries and, you know, mental health and trauma and being safe. Can you imagine the irony if we ourselves were kind of traumatizing ourselves in an unsafe way in the making of that work, you know? So it was about having like a real conscious eye on that, and yeah, creating a space and a dialogue, a language between us that we were all singing from the same hymn sheet, and one that we could all kind of like sign off on.
And also, in terms of that language and dialogue between people on set, I was interested in how that transcended into working with Michaela and Sam Miller as directors on the series, and the way that you would really work through a lot of scenes and figure out what the dynamic and what all of the different tones and beats were going to be together.
Yeah, they're really not prescriptive in a way that's like equal parts like freeing and like terrifying, you know, because like some days you turn up and you just want someone to be like, okay, this is what we're doing, you stand there, you say these lines like this, and then we'll go home. And some days you want to be like, look, don't kind of clip my wings, I'm an artist, I just want to be free to express myself, etc. They definitely exist in that side of things. But that's what I think, that's what created it. There was a real sense of immediacy about the show, and like, and yeah, like spontaneity. It didn't feel kind of over rehearsed, or yeah, it was a collaborative process. And Michaela and Sam both have got like very open ears. They really want to hear people's ideas, and they really want to think about how they can digest that, respond to it, and create something together. So I actually really haven't got enough good words to say about them too, because they really they really let us let us be feral out there.
And then also taking that same idea when it comes to working with Michaela and Wuruche Opia on a lot of the scenes as well. When you're watching the show, there's really just such a sense that there was such an innate chemistry and dynamic between the three of you. And was that, again, just a lot of openness and spontaneity when it came to figuring out scenes together?
Yeah, I mean, look, those guys they're like my sisters, you know. They're like, obviously I knew Michaela from before. Me and Michaela have known each other a long time, but which I didn't know at all. Um, but from the jump, we kind of like really just vibed each other, and she's just like such a special human being and such a talented actress and just so funny. Both of them are just so funny, you know. So like when people are just like jokes, like you can't really be too serious, can't take yourself too seriously. So it kind of like underpinned everything that we did with like a soulfulness and like yeah, generosity of spirit, which they both have in abundance.
And a huge part of the overall brilliance of the show is that it's able to jump between all of these different types of emotional spaces and get to those places which are really dark and really harrowing and really difficult to confront. And then at the same time, you have the exuberance and the humor coming through constantly as well. And when you were building Kwame as a character and really thinking about that side of him, especially as someone who, expresses himself through clothing, and that says so much about him. And, when we see him in his workplace, that he absolutely loves what he does and brings his entire personality and self. How did you want to capture that essence of just like his charisma and his exuberance, which really just shines through so much in all of those scenes?
Yeah, I actually thought that was like as vital as the scenes which some would say were oppositional to that, because yeah, Kwame goes through some shit in this series, and like it could very much be like a story about his trauma and about the put upon kind of like abused man. And I was really conscious and keen to kind of show him in his totality. He's a three-dimensional person who on some days is happy and on some days is sad. Some days is in a good mood, some days in a bad mood. Sometimes good things happen to him and sometimes bad things happen to him. That's what happens to all of us, we're never one or the other. So those things were really important to me in order to provide a kind of counterpoint to some of the lower moments in the show for him. But like, that's the whole point. He is at his best. He is a confident, sarcastic, hilarious, kind of like compelling man, and that's why people love him. That's why he's friends with these two amazing, compelling, interesting women, because they're cool people, So it's important to lean into that as much as it is to lean into the moments where like someone feels broken or someone feels vulnerable or silenced or whatever. It's about like putting all the ingredients to make a very full cake.
He also comes across as someone with just such, you know, generosity from his heart as well. And we see that in big ways in the way that he's there for Arabella, and he is really focusing on everything that she needs from him in terms of support. And then there's really tiny, small, minute details. Like there's a moment where he's at the grocery store and he's helping an older woman lift a couple of her heavier items onto the conveyor belt at the checkout. And was that something that was really important for you to channel through in all those different ways as well?
Yeah, I mean that older woman's his grandma, so um so that whole scene was again, it's again very funny because like 1 second he's helping grandma put like kidney beans and rice through the checkout, and the next second he's hooking up with someone in the corridor behind the shop, like he's a very vivacious young man, so he can be the grandson and the whatever at the same time, so yeah, it's definitely part of the same endeavor.
I also wanted to ask you about the vivaciousness of his costumes and his outfits as well, because, like I said before, that is such an expression for him. And even heard that Tyler, the creator, was one of the influences for one of the wigs that he wears at one moment. And so, was it a really collaborative relationship that you had with the costume department in terms of figuring out a lot of those details and how he was going to express himself
Yeah,
externally?
100%. Lindsay Moore is our costume designer. She's one of the best in the game, if not the best in the game. She's just like she's one of those people, right, who, like could walk into a charity shop and come out with like a fur Gucci trench coat or something, just like that. She's just got an eye and like a magnetized desire or like understanding of what clothes and character can do. And we spoke from the beginning about what clothes meant to Kwame, and how they were part of his armor. Like how it was about like the way the message he sends out to the world is through how he looks. And especially in those moments where he's feeling less strong internally, he can kind of like cover that up by looking good, or looking like strong or confident or, brash, So like it was part of his language really. And in both ways, it kind of communicated to those who really understood him when he was struggling, and also communicates to those that love him when he's like living his best life, So yeah, it wouldn't be the same if he was kind of a more kind of Scandi, kind of like muted colors, like every single day. No, I think the fact that he goes for it tells you a lot about his personality.
And then one of the other elements of an external communication of what he's feeling that I wanted to ask you about is the scene where they've gone to a spray painting exercise for Arabella, and
Yeah.
he's there just painting this picture with like bleeding eyes, and Terry's giving him the speech about how Arabella's broken inside and, you know, needs people to really notice, and he's standing right there with this piece of artwork that really says everything that he's going through. Was it always determined that that was going to be the art piece that he created, or how did it come to be that that was his expression in that moment?
Was it always that? Obviously, I didn't do it myself because there's a real limit to my artistic capability. Um, but yeah, I think we kind of had a brief conversation about like, because it was about like abstraction and like how we can kind of like communicate the psyche through abstract images. It turned out mine wasn't really that abstract, but still, people that Terry was unable to kind of see it, and it was kind of like telling that story where, like, sometimes it can really be right in front of your eyes, and people can be so kind of caught. And Terry's on her own journey. She's trying to like come to terms with what she's done and how she's let her friend down and what's happened to her and etc. And she's so kind of like caught up in that with Arabella that she can't stop to say, "Oh, are you okay?" or "What does this mean?" or whatever. Arabella herself is kind of going through what she's going through. I think at the time she's like doing the meetings, right? So like she's really kind of like reconnected with this old school friend that kind of meant this to her back in the day, etc. So many people got so many other things, quite rightly, that are taking their attention, that even the most obvious cry for help can kind of just be like lost by the wayside. So I think that's actually a very um astute point that Michaela's making through that piece of art that I couldn't do myself.
And when it came to the scene at Terry's party where he does eventually tell her, and the two of them are just laying in the bathtub together, talking at the end of the night, following someone coming in and closing the door on him, and it really just bringing everything to the surface. What was the journey of really finding where he was emotionally and finding him in a space where he does finally feel ready to say it out loud to one of his closest friends?
Yeah, I mean, it's also that thing of like when you find yourself at a birthday party or at a party, if you're not feeling right, no matter what you do, you can't make yourself have fun. And you can really try to make yourself have fun. And I think that's what Kwame is doing. He really wants to celebrate his friend's birthday, but he can't do it. And he tries to kind of like rely on the, I suppose, habits that he's used to. He's like, this is what I would usually do at a party, so maybe that worked for me, but right now it doesn't. And he's not like, and he's like, this has all been on him right now. He hasn't been able to share it with anyone. So I think there's something about the experience and the horror of being like locked in that room by Arabella, when knowing that she thinks she's trying to do a good thing, but how little does she know about what he's actually going through, etc., etc. It just needs to come out. So yeah, there wasn't really much acting required for that, just because it's just such a difficult and pressurized situation to find yourself in. So I think,
Over
you know what, I think we actually only did one take of that scene.
And overall, with your performance in the show, what were the aspects that you found the most challenging in terms of where you had to bring yourself and where you had to carry Kwame as a character through your performance?
That's a really good question. Um, I suppose it's always difficult because it's really important not to judge your characters, right? It's really important not to say, I wouldn't do that or whatever. But there are certain bits where it feels like Kwame relies on the wrong crutches in order to get him through what he's going through. And those are moments where you just want to put your arm around him and just say, yo, man, what's actually going on here? And what is this actually about? But you kind of can't. You've just got to kind of allow yourself to go with what the character's going with without asking too many questions about it. So those moments are difficult, not to kind of overthink it, or not to try and like justify it or something, because like we kind of don't do that in life. We're not always like forever justifying the things we do. We're just kind of like running with it. So those moments were challenging, but again, right.
And given that you've also worked extensively in theatre, and particularly a lot of your early roles were these really fantastic characters within the theatre space, what are some of the skill sets and tools that you find yourself consistently carrying over from the theatre, even when you're working on screen on a project like this?
Yeah, I think the thing about doing plays and doing theatre is that you always have to, because you do the whole thing on one night, you always have to think about the whole journey. You have to think about the whole arc, whereas like cinema and television can be way more immediate, and you actually probably could get away with just like playing every single moment by moment. You don't really need to think about what happened two episodes ago or what's going to happen in 3 episodes time. But I really do need to do that because I always need to have my character rooted in something that is both being pushed and pulled, pushed by the past and pulled by the future. So I think that comes from theatre. And again, I don't know if it's even a good thing to do, but it's right now I feel like it's probably the most effective way for me to not kind of go mad.
Well, I have to say, I've been so impressed by the performance that you gave in this series, and just want to thank you so much for diving into all of this and talking about it today. Thanks so much, Papa.
Oh my God, Mari, you're so kind. Thank you so much for having me. That was really, really lovely. I really loved that conversation.